Take it off, now. The words cut through the Saturday afternoon buzz of Riverside Mall like a knife. 16-year-old Mia Brennan froze, her shopping bag slipping from her fingers. The department store security scanner had beeped, just a false alarm from the underwire in her bra. But the woman blocking her path didn't care about explanations. Karen Holloway Vance, dressed in designer clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent, planted herself between Mia and the exit. Her manicured finger jabbed toward the teenager's chest. "You heard me. Remove your bra right here. You're not leaving until you prove you're not hiding stolen jewelry." Mia's face drained of color. Around them, shoppers slowed their robues, conversations dying as heads turned. The teenage security guard stammered something about protocol, but Karen talked over him, her voice rising. "I know a thief when I see one. My brother's a judge, Judge Holloway, and he handles cases like this all the time. By the way, what's your first language? Drop it in the comments below." What Karen didn't know was that the quiet maintenance supervisor who would arrive 20 minutes later, the man who would crouch beside his sobbing niece in the mall security office, had spent 12 years prosecuting people exactly like her. Owen Brennan had been a decorated JAG Corps prosecutor, the kind of military lawyer who made senior officers nervous when he walked into a courtroom. He'd specialized in authority abuse cases, pursuing commanders who thought their rank exempted them from rules. His conviction rate was flawless. His reputation was iron. Then his wife died in a convoy attack overseas, and everything changed. Her sister's daughter, 10-year-old Mia, orphaned and traumatized, needed stability more than Owen needed courtroom victories. He'd resigned his commission, moved to Riverside County, and taken the first job that offered regular hours and zero travel: courthouse maintenance supervisor. It paid a fraction of his prosecutor salary, but it let him be home when Mia got off the school bus. For 6 years, he'd mopped floors in the same building where judges decided cases. He'd repaired leaky faucets in chambers, changed light bulbs in courtrooms, and nodded politely when attorneys rushed past without seeing him. The uniform was different, but the mission was the same: take care of what mattered most. Mia had grown into a quiet, thoughtful teenager, honor roll every semester, anxiety that flared sometimes, especially in crowds, but she was managing it, healing, slowly, from losing her mother. Owen had taught her that the world had rules, that systems existed to protect people, that justice wasn't just a word lawyers threw around. Then Karen Holloway Vance grabbed his daughter's arm in a crowded mall and tried to force a child to undress in public. And every instinct Owen had buried under 6 years of maintenance work roared back to life. Owen's phone buzzed during his lunch break. Mia's name on the screen. He answered immediately, already standing, already moving toward his truck. "Uncle Owen?" Her voice was small, shaking. Something happened. He was in the truck before she finished the sentence. "Where are you?" "The mall, security office. She said I was stealing, but I wasn't. And she tried to make me." Mia's words dissolved into sobs. Owen's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "I'm 10 minutes away. Don't talk to anyone until I get there. You understand? Nobody." The courthouse was 15 minutes from Riverside Mall. Owen made it in 8. He found Mia in the security office, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, staring at nothing. The teenage security guard looked relieved when Owen walked in. Finally, an adult who might know what to do. The mall manager was on the phone, clearly uncomfortable with whatever conversation he was having. Owen knelt beside his niece. "Mia, look at me." She turned slowly, and Owen saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen since the day she'd learned her mother was dead. That hollow, violated emptiness that comes from having the world reveal itself as unsafe. "Tell me what happened," he said quietly. Mia's voice was barely a whisper. "The scanner beeped. She said I was stealing. She wanted me to take off my—" Her breath hitched. "In front of everyone. She grabbed me when I tried to leave." The security guard cleared his throat. "Sir, we have it all on camera. The woman, she was aggressive. We told her to stop, but she kept saying her brother was some judge and that she had the right to—" "Show me the footage," Owen said. What he saw on the grainy security monitor was assault, battery, false imprisonment. Everything documented in the perfect detail. Karen's face clear on camera, Mia's terror obvious, witnesses everywhere. Owen's JAG prosecutor brain, dormant for 6 years, clicked into gear like a weapon being loaded. Owen watched the security footage 3 times, his face expressionless. The mall manager hovered nearby, apologizing repeatedly, offering anything they needed. The security guard had already downloaded a copy of the footage to a USB drive. Smart kid, probably sensing this wasn't going away quietly. "I need the names and contact information of every witness," Owen said, his voice calm but absolute. "Every person who was in that area when this happened. I also need a copy of that footage, time-stamped, with the full angle from all cameras." The manager blinked. "Sir, I'm not sure we can just hand over—" "Yes, you can." Owen's tone didn't rise, but something in it made the manager step back. "My niece was assaulted in your store. Those witnesses saw a crime. That footage is evidence. You'll provide it, or I'll have a detective here with a warrant in an hour, and then your corporate office will be answering questions about why you hesitated to cooperate with a criminal investigation." The manager's phone was out before Owen finished speaking. 20 minutes later, Owen had everything he needed: witness statements, footage, medical documentation from the ER visit. Mia sat beside him in the emergency room, silent except for when the doctor asked questions. The bruises on her arm were already darkening where Karen had grabbed her. The ER physician, a woman in her 50s who'd probably seen every kind of harm humans could inflict on each other, documented everything with careful precision. "Anxiety attack triggered by physical assault and public humiliation," she wrote in her notes. "Patient reports dissociation during incident. Recommend immediate counseling for trauma response." Owen thanked her and drove Mia home. His niece stared out the window the entire way, not speaking. When they reached their modest two-bedroom apartment, the kind of place maintenance supervisors could afford, she went straight to her room and closed the door. Owen stood in the kitchen, the USB drive and witness statements on the counter in front of him. 6 years ago, he would have known exactly what to do. Now, he had to remind himself he wasn't a prosecutor anymore. He was just a guardian filing a police report. Except, he wasn't just anything. He made coffee, opened his laptop, and started typing. By midnight, he had a document that detailed every element of the incident with prosecutorial precision. Timeline, witness accounts, applicable California statutes, evidence chain of custody. It read less like a police report and more like a charging document. Old habits. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. The next morning, Owen took his meticulously prepared report to the Riverside Police Department. The desk officer directed him to Detective Rachel Ortiz, who handled assault cases. She was younger than Owen expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes that suggested she didn't miss much. "Mr. Brennan," she gestured to a chair in her cramped office. "I understand your niece was involved in an incident at the mall." "My niece was assaulted," Owen corrected gently. He placed the folder on her desk. "Everything you need is documented here. Security footage, witness statements, medical records, photos of the bruising. The suspect's name is Karen Holloway Vance." Rachel's eyebrows rose slightly at the level of organization, but she didn't comment. She opened the folder and started reading. Owen watched her face shift from professional interest to genuine concern as she reviewed the material. "This is thorough," she said finally. "Most complainants don't come in with this level of documentation. I want to make sure nothing gets overlooked." Rachel studied him for a moment. "What do you do for work, Mr. Brennan?" "I'm a maintenance supervisor at the county courthouse." Something flickered in her expression. Maybe surprised that someone with his evident capabilities worked such a humble job. But she was professional enough not to comment. Instead, she pulled up the security footage on her computer and watched it twice. "Jesus," she muttered. "She really did try to force a teenager to undress in public." Rachel's jaw tightened. "And she name-dropped a judge while doing it." "Judge Marcus Holloway," Owen confirmed. "Her brother." Rachel's expression shifted again, this time to something more complicated. Owen recognized it. The look people got when they realized a case involved someone powerful, someone connected. The calculation of whether pursuing it was worth the trouble. "I need to be honest with you," Rachel said carefully. "Karen Holloway Vance has a history, complaints that never went anywhere. Her brother has a lot of influence in this county." "I understand." Owen's voice remained steady. "But you have everything you need to recommend charges: assault, battery, false imprisonment, child endangerment. The evidence is documented. There are multiple witnesses. My niece has medical records confirming injury and trauma. Rachel nodded slowly, still studying him. You know the system pretty well for a maintenance supervisor. I pay attention. She held his gaze for a long moment, then closed the folder. I'll forward this to the DA's office with a recommendation to prosecute. That's all I can promise. That's all I'm asking. Owen left the police station with the first piece in place. He'd documented everything perfectly, ensured the evidence chain was unbreakable, and put the wheels in motion. Now, he had to wait and see if the system would work the way it was designed to, or if Karen's family connections would make this disappear like all her other incidents. He drove to the courthouse for his afternoon shift, changed into his maintenance uniform, and spent 3 hours repairing a broken air conditioning unit in Judge Holloway's chambers. The judge never looked at him once. 3 weeks passed before Owen heard from Detective Ortiz again. 3 weeks of watching Mia flinch every time they entered a store, of her refusing to go anywhere crowded, of her therapist documenting the escalating anxiety that made it hard for her to sleep. 3 weeks of Owen mopping courthouse floors and fixing leaky faucets while filing every receipt, every therapy bill, every piece of documentation that showed the ongoing harm Karen's assault had caused. Rachel called on a Tuesday morning. The DA's office filed charges: assault, battery, false imprisonment, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Karen Holloway Vance will be arraigned next week. Owen closed his eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Rachel said. Her attorney is Mitchell Barnes, expensive, connected, the kind of lawyer who makes cases disappear. And there's already been some unusual activity around this case. What kind of activity? The kind where a judge who isn't assigned to the case starts asking hypothetical questions about dismissal procedures. Rachel's voice dropped. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but Judge Holloway has been making calls. Nothing official, nothing that crosses a line, but enough that people are noticing. Owen's grip tightened on his phone. He's trying to protect his sister. That's my read. The good news is the DA assigned this to Judge Diana Costa. She's solid by the book, doesn't play politics. The court's conflict of interest screening flagged Judge Holloway's relationship automatically, so he can't touch the case officially. But he can apply pressure behind the scenes. He's a respected judge. People listen when he talks, even informally. Rachel paused. I'm telling you this because you should be prepared. This might not be the straightforward prosecution it should be. After the call ended, Owen sat in his truck in the courthouse parking lot thinking. He'd expected Karen to have expensive representation. He'd even anticipated that Judge Holloway might try to help his sister. But hearing it confirmed was different. The system had protocols to prevent conflicts of interest, but influence didn't follow official channels. It flowed through phone calls, casual conversations, professional courtesies between people who worked together every day. Owen had prosecuted this exact kind of corruption in the military, the soft, insidious kind that never left paper trails but destroyed cases just as effectively as destroyed evidence. He needed leverage, insurance, something that would prevent Judge Holloway's influence from derailing Mia's case. That afternoon, Owen requested his break during the court administrator's usual lunch hour. David Kessler, 52, former Army paralegal, had worked at the courthouse for 15 years. He and Owen had overlapped briefly in the JAG Corps, different units, different cases, but they had recognized each other when Owen started working maintenance. They'd never discussed Owen's past career in detail, maintaining the unspoken agreement that some things stayed buried. Today, Owen needed to break that agreement. He found David in his office, reviewing scheduling documents. The older man looked up, surprised. Owen, everything okay with the HVAC system? I need to ask you something off the record. David's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. He gestured for Owen to close the door. Go ahead. Karen Holloway Vance's criminal case, the assault charges. I need to know if Judge Holloway has been making inquiries about it. A long silence. David studied Owen carefully. That's your niece's case. Yes. And you're asking because I used to be JAG Corps, prosecutor, 12 years. Owen met his gaze steadily. I know what systemic corruption looks like, David. I need to know if I'm seeing it here. David leaned back in his chair, processing this. You gave up being a prosecutor to work maintenance? I gave it up to raise my niece after her mother died. The job doesn't matter. Mia matters. Another silence, then David sighed. Judge Holloway has called my office twice, asking about cases. Assignment protocols. He's spoken to the DA's office about appropriate resolution for first-time offenders, even though his sister has a history of complaints. He's had lunch with 3 different judges who regularly handle criminal cases. Nothing provably unethical, but the pattern is clear. He's setting up a network of influence to protect her. That's my assessment, but proving it is another matter. Everything he's done is technically within bounds of collegial conversation. Owen nodded slowly. What if someone filed a complaint with the Commission on Judicial Performance? Not an accusation of specific misconduct, but a documented pattern of behavior that suggests improper influence in a case involving a family member? David's eyes narrowed. You'd need detailed records, dates, times, witnesses to conversations. The Commission doesn't investigate based on speculation. I can get that documentation. Owen stood. I know how to build a case, David. I just needed to confirm my suspicions first. Owen, David's voice stopped him at the door. If you're going after a sitting judge, even informally, you need to understand what you're risking. Judge Holloway has friends, power. He could make your life very difficult. He already made my life difficult when his sister assaulted my daughter. Owen's voice was quiet but absolute. I'm not going after him, David. I'm just making sure the system works the way it's supposed to. That's what I did in the JAG Corps, and that's what I'm going to do now. Owen left the office and returned to his maintenance duties. That evening, he started a new document on his laptop, a detailed timeline of every action Judge Holloway had taken regarding Karen's case, compiled from conversations with Rachel, observations at the courthouse, and David's careful confirmation. He wasn't going to let influence triumph over evidence. Not this time. Not when it was Mia's safety and dignity at stake. Karen Holloway Vance's arraignment was scheduled for Thursday morning in Judge Acosta's courtroom. Owen requested the morning off, citing a family appointment, and arrived at the courthouse an hour early. He wore slacks and a button-down shirt instead of his maintenance uniform. Nothing fancy, but presentable. He wanted to see Karen's face when she realized the case wasn't going away. The courtroom filled slowly. Owen sat in the back row of the gallery, a small notebook in his lap. Rachel Ortiz arrived and gave him a subtle nod before taking her seat near the prosecution table. The DA handling the case was a younger attorney named Jessica Chen, sharp-eyed and methodical in her preparation. Then Karen walked in with her lawyer, Mitchell Barnes. She wore an expensive navy suit and pearls, her hair perfectly styled, her expression one of barely concealed annoyance rather than concern. She looked like someone attending an inconvenient meeting, not a criminal proceeding. Barnes, silver-haired and confident, whispered something to her that made her smile. Judge Acosta entered precisely at 9. She was in her late 50s with steel-gray hair and a reputation for running an efficient courtroom. The bailiff called the case, and Karen stepped forward with her attorney. The arraignment itself was procedural, reading of charges, entry of plea. Karen pled not guilty in a clear, steady voice that suggested she found the entire proceeding beneath her. Barnes immediately requested a motion hearing for the following week, indicating he intended to challenge the admissibility of evidence. Motion scheduled for next Thursday, 9 a.m., Judge Acosta said crisply. Bail is set at $50,000. The defendant is ordered to have no contact with the victim or her family. Karen posted bail within the hour. Owen watched her leave the courthouse with her brother, who'd been waiting in the lobby. Judge Holloway had his arm around her shoulders, his expression grim but protective. They didn't notice the maintenance supervisor sitting on a bench near the exit, but Owen noticed everything, the way Marcus scanned the hallway for witnesses before speaking to his sister, the way he handed her what looked like a business card, the way she nodded and tucked it into her purse. Another contact, another piece of influence being deployed. Owen returned to work, changed into his uniform, and spent the afternoon repairing a malfunctioning door lock in the records department. While he worked, he listened to the clerks gossiping about Karen's case. Apparently, Judge Holloway had stopped by earlier in the week to ask about pretrial motion procedures. Just general questions, he'd claimed, for a seminar he was preparing. But everyone knew his sister had just been charged. That evening, Owen updated his documentation. The timeline was growing more detailed, the pattern more obvious. Judge Holloway wasn't breaking any explicit rules, but he was systematically positioning himself to influence the case from every angle that didn't require his official involvement. The motion hearing arrived. Barnes filed 3 separate motions: to exclude the security footage on technical grounds, to suppress witness testimony as unreliable, and to dismiss the child endangerment charge entirely. Owen read through the filings carefully. They were professionally crafted, citing relevant precedent, but they relied heavily on creative interpretations of evidence rules. In court, Barnes argued smoothly that the security footage had been improperly maintained, that the chain of custody was unclear, that the witnesses' accounts were inconsistent on minor details. He painted Karen as a concerned citizen who'd made an honest mistake in a chaotic situation. Jessica Chen countered methodically. The footage had been properly maintained and time-stamped. The witnesses all agreed on the essential facts, that Karen had physically restrained a minor and attempted to force her to undress in public. The medical records documented both physical injury and psychological trauma. Judge Acosta listened to both sides, asked pointed questions, and took the matter under submission. "I'll issue a written ruling by end of business Friday," she announced. As the hearing concluded, Owen noticed something interesting. Judge Holloway was sitting in the back of the courtroom, not in the gallery where family members typically sat, but in the area reserved for attorneys and court personnel. He was observing, taking mental notes, probably so he could advise his sister on what to expect. When Owen left the courtroom, he deliberately walked past where Marcus was standing. Their eyes met for half a second. The judge's gaze slid over him without recognition. Just another courthouse employee, invisible and irrelevant. Owen had counted on that invisibility for 6 years. Now, he was using it as camouflage while he built his case within the case. Friday afternoon, Judge Acosta's ruling came down. She denied all 3 motions. The security footage was admissible, properly maintained, and highly relevant. The witness testimony was consistent on material facts and would be allowed. The child endangerment charge stood because California law was clear. Forcing a minor to remove clothing in a public place constituted endangerment regardless of the defendant's stated intentions. It was a complete victory for the prosecution. Owen read the ruling twice, noting Judge Acosta's carefully reasoned analysis. She'd anticipated every argument Barnes might make on appeal and preemptively addressed them. The case was airtight. That evening, David Kessler called Owen at home. "You should know Judge Holloway requested a meeting with Judge Acosta this afternoon. She refused. Then he tried to schedule a lunch meeting. She refused that too. She knows what he's doing. She's protecting the integrity of her case. But Owen, he's not going to stop. He's already making calls to the DA's office about plea negotiations." Owen had expected this. With the evidence secure and the motions denied, Marcus would shift strategies. He'd push for a plea deal, something that would let Karen avoid jail time, plead to a lesser charge, make this all go away with minimal consequences. "Thanks for the warning," Owen said. After hanging up, he opened his laptop and added the latest information to his growing file. Then he drafted a formal complaint to the California Commission on Judicial Performance. He didn't submit it, not yet. It was ammunition, carefully prepared, waiting for the right moment. The system was working, but only because people like Judge Acosta and Detective Ortiz were holding the line. Owen needed to make sure that even if they faltered, even if the pressure became too much, there would be consequences for anyone who tried to subvert justice for Karen Holloway Vance. He saved the document and closed his laptop. Mia was in her room, doing homework. She'd had a better week, fewer nightmares, more time out of this house. The therapy was helping, but she still wouldn't go near the mall. Owen checked on her, reassured himself she was okay, and went to bed. Tomorrow he'd be back in his maintenance uniform, invisible again, watching and documenting, while the legal machinery ground forward. The DA's office called Owen 2 weeks later. Jessica Chen's voice was carefully neutral. "Mr. Brennan, I wanted to inform you that the defense has approached us about a plea agreement. They're offering a guilty plea to simple assault in exchange for dropping the other charges. Karen Holloway Vance would receive probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. No jail time." Owen stood in the courthouse basement, his hand tightening around the phone. "What's your recommendation?" "Honestly, the evidence is strong enough to win at trial, but trials are unpredictable, and this guarantees a conviction on her record. Some victims prefer certainty over the risk of acquittal." Jessica paused. However, given the severity of what happened to your niece, I believe we should proceed to trial. I wanted to get your thoughts first." "Proceed to trial," Owen said without hesitation. "Karen Holloway Vance physically assaulted a child and tried to force her to undress in public. She showed no remorse. She deserves the full consequences of her actions." "That's what I thought you'd say." There was approval in Jessica's tone. "I'll reject the plea offer. We'll start trial prep." After the call ended, Owen stood in the dim basement hallway, thinking. The plea offer was exactly what he'd anticipated. Judge Holloway's influence manifesting as pressure on the DA's office to resolve this quietly. But Jessica had resisted, giving Owen the choice, and he'd made it. Now, Marcus would escalate. 2 days later, Rachel Ortiz called. "You need to hear this. Mitchell Barnes filed a motion to transfer the case to family court. He's arguing that since the victim is a minor, the case should be handled in juvenile jurisdiction rather than criminal court." "That makes no sense legally," Owen said. "The defendant is an adult. This is a criminal matter." "I know, but guess which judge he specifically requested in the motion? Judge Marcus Holloway, citing his extensive experience with cases involving juveniles." There it was. The transparent attempt to get Marcus officially assigned to Karen's case. Owen felt a cold satisfaction. Marcus was getting desperate enough to make obvious moves. "Judge Acosta will deny it," Owen predicted. Already did. Her written order was brutal. She noted that the defendant's familial relationship to Judge Holloway was flagged during intake, that any attempt to manipulate court assignments could constitute obstruction, and that Barnes should be more careful about filing frivolous motions. Rachel's voice carried grim amusement. She basically accused them of trying to game the system without explicitly saying it. Owen allowed himself a small smile. Judge Acosta was proving to be exactly what the case needed, incorruptible and unintimidated. But Marcus wouldn't stop. Men with power rarely did when that power was threatened. Owen was right. Over the next 3 weeks, he documented 6 more instances of Judge Holloway's influence attempts. Marcus had lunch with 2 different prosecutors who worked in the same office as Jessica Chen. He attended a judicial conference and was overheard discussing appropriate sentencing for first-time offenders with judges who might handle the case if Acosta recused herself. He called the court administrator's office asking about hypothetical scenarios where a case might need to be reassigned. David Kessler kept Owen informed, his discomfort growing with each update. "He's being more aggressive, less subtle. I think he's worried the trial will actually happen." "It will," Owen said, "unless he does something that crosses the line clearly enough that I can use it." If you're still watching, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss how this ends. The trial date was set for 6 weeks out. Owen used that time to help Jessica prepare, offering insights from his JAG experience without revealing the full extent of his background. He suggested questions for witnesses, helped organize evidence presentation, and pointed out potential defense strategies before Barnes could deploy them. Jessica started looking at him differently. "You're remarkably knowledgeable about trial procedure for a maintenance supervisor." "I pay attention," Owen replied, the same answer he'd given Rachel months ago. "No, this is more than that. This is professional-level understanding." She studied him carefully. "What did you do before maintenance?" Owen considered deflecting again, then decided the truth might serve his purposes better. "I was a JAG Corps prosecutor. 12 years. I specialized in authority abuse and misconduct cases." Jessica's eyes widened. "And you're working as a father first. The job pays the bills and lets me be there for my niece. But yes, I know how to build a case." Owen met her gaze steadily. "I know how to win one too. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I'm not the attorney here. You are. I didn't want to overstep." Owen paused. "But I also didn't want to see this case destroyed by someone abusing their influence. So I've been documenting everything. Every contact Judge Holloway has made regarding his sister's case, every attempt to pressure the DA's office, every informal inquiry about dismissal procedures." Jessica leaned forward. "You're building a judicial misconduct case. I'm building insurance. If this case gets derailed, if Karen somehow walks away without consequences, I want there to be accountability for why that happened." Owen pulled out a USB drive and placed it on her desk. "Everything I have is on here. Dates, times, witnesses, context. I haven't filed anything with the Commission on Judicial Performance yet, but I will if I need to. She picked up the drive, turning it over in her fingers. This could end Judge Holloway's career. Only if he's done something wrong. If he hasn't, then my documentation proves nothing. Owen's voice was calm, factual. But if he has been abusing his position to obstruct justice, then yes, there should be consequences. Jessica nodded slowly. You're not just protecting your niece's case, you're protecting the integrity of the system. That's what prosecutors are supposed to do. That's what I did for 12 years. Owen stood. Now I'm just making sure you have the support you need to do the same thing. He left Jessica's office and returned to his maintenance duties, but something had shifted. The pieces were in place now. The evidence was secure, the prosecutor was committed, and Owen had leverage that would prevent Marcus from sabotaging the case without destroying himself in the process. The trial was coming, and Owen was ready. The trial began on a Monday morning in late September. Owen had requested the week off, telling his supervisor he needed to attend family court proceedings. He arrived early, dressed in the same modest slacks and button-down shirt he'd worn to the arraignment, and took his seat in the gallery beside Mia. His niece was pale, her hands twisted together in her lap. Her therapist had prepared her for testifying, but Owen could see the anxiety radiating from her. He placed his hand over hers, steady and warm. "You're going to tell the truth," he said quietly. "That's all you have to do. The truth is enough." The courtroom filled quickly. Local parent advocacy groups had taken interest in the case after news articles covered the pre-trial motions. Several journalists sat in the press section. Karen entered with Mitchell Barnes, her expression carefully composed, but her shoulders tight with tension. She didn't look at Mia. Judge Acosta called the court to order. Jury selection had been completed the previous week. 12 citizens who'd been screened carefully for bias and connection to the Holloway family. Now came opening statements. Jessica Chen stood and addressed the jury with quiet intensity. "This case is about power and accountability. Karen Holloway Vance used her perceived authority to humiliate and assault a 16-year-old girl in a public space. She physically restrained the victim, attempted to force her to remove her clothing, and caused lasting psychological harm. The evidence will show that the defendant acted with complete disregard for the victim's dignity, safety, and legal rights. When security intervened, she invoked her brother's position as a judge, believing it would shield her from consequences." Mitchell Barnes countered with a smooth, reasonable tone. "This case is about a misunderstanding in a chaotic moment. My client, Karen Holloway Vance, believed she witnessed a theft. She acted as any concerned citizen might, perhaps overzealously, but without criminal intent. The prosecution will ask you to criminalize good intentions and honest mistakes. We ask that you see this situation for what it truly was. A regrettable incident, not a crime." The prosecution's case unfolded methodically over 3 days. Jessica called the teenage security guard first, who testified about Karen's aggressive behavior and her refusal to let mall security handle the situation. Then came the witnesses, shoppers who'd been in the department store that afternoon, each describing the scene with consistent details. A mother with 2 young children testified that she'd covered her daughter's eyes because she thought Karen was going to physically strip Mia in front of everyone. The mall security footage played on screens throughout the courtroom. The jury watched in silence as Karen blocked Mia's exit, grabbed her arm, and attempted to drag her toward a fitting room. They heard Karen's voice on the audio. "Take it off! Now!" They saw Mia's face, frozen in terror. They saw Karen invoke her brother's name when security finally intervened. Barnes cross-examined each witness, trying to establish that the lighting was poor, that people's memories were unreliable, that the situation had been confusing. But the footage was undeniable, and the witnesses' accounts matched too closely to dismiss. On the 3rd day, the ER physician testified about Mia's injuries and trauma response. She presented photographs of the bruising on Mia's arm, medical documentation of the anxiety attack, and her professional opinion that the incident had caused significant psychological harm requiring ongoing treatment. Then it was Mia's turn. Owen watched his niece walk to the witness stand, her steps careful and measured. She was sworn in, her voice barely audible. Jessica approached with gentleness, asking simple questions, letting Mia tell the story in her own words. "I was just walking through the store," Mia said, her hands gripping the edge of the witness box. The scanner beeped. I didn't understand why. Then this woman was blocking my way, yelling at me, calling me a thief. Her voice wavered. She said I had to take off my bra to prove I wasn't stealing, right there, in front of everyone. I said no, but she grabbed my arm. She wouldn't let me leave. What were you feeling in that moment? Jessica asked. Mia's eyes filled with tears. Scared, embarrassed, like I'd done something wrong even though I hadn't. Like no one was going to help me. She looked at the jury. I kept thinking about my mom. She died when I was 10. Uncle Owen always told me the world had rules to protect people, that if something bad happened, there were systems to help. But this woman didn't care about rules. She just kept saying her brother was a judge, like that meant she could do whatever she wanted. The courtroom was silent. Several jurors were leaning forward, their expressions sympathetic. Barnes cross-examined carefully, trying to suggest that Mia had overreacted, that she'd been defiant rather than compliant, that perhaps she'd escalated the situation. But Mia held steady, her quiet dignity more powerful than any aggressive defense. I just wanted to go home, she said. I wasn't defiant. I was terrified. When Mia stepped down, Owen met her at the gate separating the gallery from the well of the courtroom. She collapsed into his arms, shaking. He held her while the judge called a recess, whispering reassurances that she'd done perfectly, that she'd been brave, that it was almost over. The prosecution rested that afternoon. Barnes called only 2 witnesses, a character witness who testified that Karen was a respected businesswoman and philanthropist, and an expert who suggested that concerned citizens sometimes made errors in judgment during stressful situations. Neither witness had been present at the mall. Neither could contradict the security footage or the medical evidence. The defense rested quickly. Barnes was smart enough to know that prolonging the trial wouldn't help his client. Closing arguments were scheduled for the next morning. Owen spent that evening with Mia, making her favorite dinner, watching her slowly relax, as the ordeal of testifying passed. She fell asleep on the couch during a movie, and he carried her to bed the way he had when she was 10 years old and freshly orphaned. He returned to the living room and opened his laptop. The trial had gone well, better than expected, but Owen had learned long ago not to trust juries until the verdict was read. He reviewed his documentation one more time, ensuring everything was current and complete. If Karen was acquitted despite the overwhelming evidence, Owen would know exactly who to hold accountable. Closing arguments began at 9 the next morning. Mitchell Barnes went first, his voice measured and persuasive. He acknowledged that Karen's actions had been poorly judged, but insisted they fell short of criminal conduct. Ask yourselves, he told the jury, have you ever made a mistake? Have you ever acted on incomplete information and later regretted it? My client saw what she believed was a theft. She reacted. Was her reaction perfect? No. Was it criminal? Absolutely not. Jessica Chen's closing was different, direct, factual, devastating. She walked the jury through the evidence piece by piece, showing how each element of each charge had been proven beyond reasonable doubt. The defendant didn't make a mistake. She made a choice. She chose to physically restrain a child. She chose to attempt forcing that child to remove her clothing in public. She chose to invoke her brother's judicial position to intimidate security personnel. These weren't errors in judgment. These were deliberate acts of assault, battery, and false imprisonment. Jessica paused, letting her words settle. And when confronted with what she'd done, Karen Holloway Vance showed no remorse, no apology, no acknowledgement of harm. Instead, she hid behind expensive lawyers and family connections, hoping you would see her privilege as more important than the truth. Don't let her. Hold her accountable. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 43 minutes. Owen sat in the hallway with Mia, waiting. Rachel Ortiz joined them, offering quiet support. When the bailiff announced the jury had reached a verdict, Owen felt his pulse steady into the rhythm he remembered from JAG Corps trials, calm focus, readiness for whatever came next. The courtroom filled quickly. Karen sat rigid beside her attorney, her face carefully blank. Judge Acosta entered, and the jury filed in. Owen studied their faces, reading what 12 years of trial experience had taught him to see. They didn't look at Karen. That was usually a bad sign for the defense. The foreperson stood, a retired teacher in her 60s. We, the jury, find the defendant, Karen Holloway Vance, guilty of assault, guilty of battery, guilty of false imprisonment, guilty of child endangerment. Karen's face went white. Beside her, Barnes remained professional, but his jaw tightened. In the gallery, Owen felt Mia's hand find his, squeezing hard. He squeezed back, steady and sure. Judge Acosta polled the jury. All 12 confirmed their verdict. She set sentencing for 3 weeks out, allowing time for probation reports and victim impact statements. Karen was released on bail pending sentencing, but the restraining order remained in effect. As the courtroom emptied, Owen noticed Judge Marcus Holloway standing in the back hallway. His face was ashen, aged years in the span of the trial. Their eyes met again, but this time recognition flickered in Marcus's expression, not of Owen specifically, but of defeat. His sister had been convicted despite everything he'd tried to prevent. Owen guided Mia out through a side exit, avoiding the reporters clustered near the main doors. Rachel caught up with them in the parking lot. "That was as clean a verdict as I've ever seen," she said. The jury didn't hesitate. "The evidence didn't give them room to," Owen replied. "That's how cases should work." Rachel studied him. "Jessica told me about your background. JAG Corps, prosecutor, 12 years. Owen nodded. "You could have told me that from the beginning. Would have saved me some skepticism about whether this case would go anywhere. I needed the case to stand on its own merits, not on my credentials," Owen said. "Justice shouldn't depend on who you used to be. It should depend on what actually happened." Rachel smiled slightly. "You built this case like a prosecutor, documented everything like you were going to trial yourself, and stayed invisible the whole time. That's impressive. I just made sure the people doing their jobs had what they needed to do them well." Owen glanced at Mia, who was leaning against his truck, exhausted but relieved. "That's all I wanted." Over the next 3 weeks, Owen prepared Mia's victim impact statement with her therapist's help. Mia wrote about the nightmares, the anxiety attacks, the way she couldn't enter stores without her heart racing. She wrote about feeling violated and powerless, about how the incident had shattered her sense of safety in public spaces. Owen helped her refine it, ensuring every word was honest and clear. He also continued documenting Judge Holloway's activities. Even after the conviction, Marcus made calls to the probation department, inquiring about sentencing recommendations. He spoke with colleagues about cases involving first-time offenders with no prior convictions. The pattern persisted. Marcus couldn't stop trying to protect his sister. David Kessler called Owen 4 days before sentencing. "You should know Judge Acosta is in the hospital. Collapsed yesterday during a hearing. Doctors say it's a cardiac event. Serious but stable. She's going to be out for at least 6 weeks." Owen's stomach tightened. "What happens to Karen's sentencing?" "Court administration has to reassign it. The conviction stands, but another judge will handle sentencing to avoid delays that could jeopardize the case on appeal." David paused. "The assignment algorithm runs automatically. It's randomized to prevent manipulation. When will we know who gets it?" "Tomorrow morning. The system generates the assignment overnight and notifies both parties." Owen thanked him and hung up. He sat in his living room, thinking through possibilities. The timing was unfortunate but not suspicious. Judge Acosta's health crisis was real and documented. The reassignment protocol was standard procedure. But if the random algorithm assigned Karen's sentencing to the wrong judge, someone susceptible to Marcus's influence, everything could still unravel. He opened his laptop and reviewed his documentation file one more time. The complaint to the Commission on Judicial Performance was complete, detailed, damning. He'd held it back during the trial, not wanting to distract from the criminal case. But if sentencing went wrong, if Karen received a slap on the wrist from a judge Marcus had cultivated, Owen would file it immediately. His phone buzzed the next morning at 7. David Kessler's name appeared on the screen. Owen answered, already standing, already moving. "The reassignment came through," David said, his voice strange. "Owen, you need to sit down for this. Just tell me." The algorithm assigned Karen Holloway Vance's sentencing to Judge Marcus Holloway. Owen stopped breathing for a moment. "That's impossible. The conflict screening should have..." The screening flag was on the original case assignment, but Judge Acosta was already assigned, so Marcus was never in the pool. When the system ran the reassignment algorithm, it only screened for judges who'd been involved in the case previously. Marcus technically hadn't been, at least not officially. David's voice was grim. "It's a gap in the protocol. Happens maybe once every 5 years. And it just happened on his sister's case. Owen sat down slowly, his mind racing. This all wasn't manipulation, this was chance, random, documented, impossible to anticipate. The system that Owen had trusted, that he'd built his entire strategy around, had just delivered Karen's fate into her brother's hands. Owen stood in his kitchen, phone still pressed to his ear, processing what David had just told him. The randomized algorithm, the system designed to prevent exactly this kind of conflict, had assigned Karen's sentencing to her own brother. Pure chance, fully documented, completely legitimate procedurally, and absolutely disastrous unless Owen acted carefully. When does he have to decide whether to recuse? Owen asked. By end of business today. Court rules require immediate disclosure of conflicts. David hesitated. Owen, if he recuses now, it delays sentencing another 2 weeks minimum. But if he doesn't recuse, he has to sentence his own sister in open court, with everyone watching. Exactly. The trial got media coverage. Parent advocacy groups are following this case. If Marcus takes the assignment, every decision he makes will be scrutinized. David's voice dropped. And if you file that judicial complaint you've been holding, he'll know you documented every improper contact he made during the prosecution. Owen understood immediately. Marcus was trapped. If he recused himself now, after his sister's conviction, it would look like abandonment. And Owen's complaint could still be filed, exposing all the behind-the-scenes influence Marcus had attempted. But if Marcus accepted the assignment, he'd have to sentence Karen publicly, knowing that any leniency would destroy his career and trigger Owen's complaint anyway. He can't win either way, Owen said slowly. No, you made sure of that. David paused. Did you plan this? I couldn't have planned this. The algorithm is randomized, and Judge Acosta's illness was real. Owen's voice was quiet. But I prepared for every possibility. That's what prosecutors do. After hanging up, Owen sat at his kitchen table, thinking. He'd built this case on the principle that systems should work as designed, that evidence and procedure should matter more than influence and connections. Now the system had delivered an outcome he couldn't have engineered, but could absolutely use. He opened his laptop and made one addition to his commission complaint, a dated note documenting that Judge Holloway had been randomly assigned to sentence his sister, and that Owen was holding this complaint pending the outcome of that sentencing. If Marcus showed inappropriate leniency, the complaint would be filed within 24 hours. If Marcus recused himself, the complaint would note that he'd attempted to influence the case before ultimately declining to participate officially. Either way, there would be accountability. Owen saved the document, backed it up to 3 different locations, and sent an encrypted copy to Jessica Chen with a note explaining his strategy. Then he went to check on Mia, who was getting ready for school. She'd been sleeping better since the verdict, slowly reclaiming pieces of her normal life. Is the sentencing still happening next week? She asked. Yes, there's been a change of judge, but it's still scheduled. Owen chose his words carefully. The new judge is Karen's brother. Mia's eyes widened. Can he do that? Isn't that... It's complicated, but I want you to trust that the system is going to work. Owen put his hands on her shoulders. Sometimes justice doesn't look the way we expect, but I promise you, Karen is going to face consequences for what she did. At noon, David called again. Judge Holloway accepted the assignment. He's sentencing his sister next Thursday at 2 p.m. in courtroom 3A. Owen closed his eyes. Marcus had chosen the harder path, the public path. Whether out of duty, pride, or fear of how recusal would look, he'd committed to sentencing Karen himself. There's more, David continued. Marcus requested that I personally deliver notice to you and your niece about the sentencing hearing. He specified that the notice should inform you of your right to present a victim impact statement and that the hearing will be open to the public. He's making sure it's all documented, Owen said, making sure everyone knows he's following procedure. That's my read, too. He knows he's under scrutiny. David's voice carried reluctant admiration. You backed him into a corner where his only option is to do the right thing. Over the next week, Owen watched the courthouse dynamics shift. Word spread about the unusual situation. A judge sentencing his own sister after failing to recuse himself from a case he'd tried to influence from the shadows. Reporters started calling the court administrator's office. Parent advocacy groups announced they'd be attending the hearing. The local bar association quietly noted they'd be observing as well. Make sure you subscribe so you see how this plays out. Marcus Holloway had spent his career building a reputation for fairness and integrity. Now that reputation was on the line, and everyone would be watching to see if family loyalty or judicial ethics would prevail. Owen spent Tuesday evening helping Mia prepare to read her victim impact statement in court. She'd practiced with her therapist, but Owen wanted her to feel confident. They sat together on the couch and she read the statement aloud, her voice shaking at first, then growing stronger. I trusted that adults would protect me, but Karen Holloway Vance saw me as beneath her. She used her family's power to hurt me and tried to use it to escape consequences. I want the court to know that what she did still affects me every day. I have nightmares. I can't go into stores alone. I see her face when I close my eyes. Mia paused, then finished. But I also learned that my uncle was right. The system can work. Justice can happen. I'm here because I believe that. Owen's throat tightened. You're incredibly brave. I'm scared, Mia admitted. But Uncle Owen, you gave up everything to take care of me. You left your whole career. The least I can do is be brave enough to read this statement. Thursday arrived gray and cold. Owen and Mia arrived at the courthouse early, dressed formally. The courtroom was already filling. Journalists, advocates, community members, and courthouse staff who rarely attended sentencings. This wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about whether a judge would choose integrity over family. Owen noticed several of Marcus's judicial colleagues in the gallery, their presence a silent reminder that the entire legal community was watching. Rachel Ortiz sat near the front. Jessica Chen was at the prosecution table, her case file open and meticulous. Then Karen entered with Mitchell Barnes, her face pale and drawn. She'd aged since the verdict, the reality of conviction finally penetrating her entitled certainty. Barnes looked resigned, knowing there was nothing left to argue. The bailiff stood. All rise. The Honorable Judge Marcus Holloway presiding. Marcus entered and took the bench. His face was composed but tired, carrying the weight of impossible choices. For a moment, his eyes found Owen in the gallery. Not the invisible maintenance supervisor anymore, but the prosecutor who'd built an unbreakable case and then forced Marcus to face it publicly. Recognition passed between them. Marcus knew exactly what Owen had done, and why. The judge cleared his throat and looked down at the file before him. We are here for sentencing in the matter of the People versus Karen Holloway Vance. Before I proceed, I want to acknowledge the unusual circumstances of this case. The courtroom went silent, everyone leaning forward. The defendant is my sister, Marcus continued, his voice steady but strained. This assignment came through random court protocol following Judge Acosta's medical emergency. I consulted with the Commission on Judicial Performance and was advised that recusal at the sentencing stage, after conviction, could create appealable delay issues. Therefore, I am proceeding with full transparency and adherence to sentencing guidelines. Owen recognized the careful language. Marcus was creating a record that would withstand scrutiny. I have reviewed the probation report, the trial transcripts, and all submitted materials, Marcus said. I will now hear from the prosecution and the victim before rendering sentence. Jessica Chen rose first, her voice clear and unwavering. Your Honor, the people recommend the upper term of sentencing for all counts. The defendant's actions were deliberate, harmful, and showed complete disregard for the victim's well-being. Ms. Holloway Vance physically assaulted a minor in a public place, attempted to force her to remove clothing, and caused lasting psychological trauma. Even after conviction, the defendant has shown no genuine remorse. The people request 18 months in county jail, 3 years, probation, mandatory counseling, and a permanent restraining order. Mitchell Barnes stood next, his argument notably brief. Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record. She is a respected businesswoman and contributor to the community. While the jury found her actions criminal, we maintain they stemmed from misunderstanding rather than malice. We request probation, community service, and counseling, a sentence that allows rehabilitation without incarceration. Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. I'll hear from the victim now. Mia stood, her hands clutching the paper containing her statement. Owen watched her walk to the podium, every instinct screaming to protect her from this final ordeal. But she'd insisted on speaking, on making Karen and everyone else understand what had been taken from her. "My name is Mia Brennan," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I'm 16 years old. On the day Karen Holloway Vance assaulted me, I was just shopping with friends. I hadn't done anything wrong, but she decided I was a thief because a security scanner beeped. She grabbed me, yelled at me, tried to force me to take off my bra in front of dozens of people." Mia's voice wavered, then strengthened. "I lost my mother when I was 10. She died overseas, and my Uncle Owen gave up his career to raise me. He taught me that the world has rules to protect people, that systems exist to help when bad things happen. But that day, Karen Holloway Vance showed me that some people think rules don't apply to them. She thought her brother's position made her powerful enough to hurt me without consequences." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Karen stared at the defense table, refusing to meet Mia's eyes. "I still have nightmares about that day. I can't go into stores without panicking. I see strangers and wonder if they're going to grab me, humiliate me, tell me I'm worthless." Mia's hands shook, but her voice held firm. "But I also learned something else. I learned that my uncle was right about justice. It took time, and it was hard. But the system did work. The police investigated. The prosecutors believed me. The jury saw the truth." Mia looked directly at Marcus now. "Your Honor, I know this is difficult for you. Karen is your sister. But she hurt me badly, and she never once said she was sorry. She still thinks she did nothing wrong. If you let her avoid real consequences, you're telling victims like me that family and power matter more than truth. Please don't do that." She returned to her seat beside Owen, tears streaming down her face. He put his arm around her shoulders, holding her steady. Marcus sat motionless for a long moment, staring at the bench in front of him. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with something that might have been grief. "I've been a judge for 15 years. In that time, I've sentenced hundreds of people. I've always believed that justice requires impartiality, that the law must apply equally regardless of who stands before the bench." He paused. "Today, I am tested in that belief in the most personal way possible." He looked at Karen then, really looked at her, and Owen saw something crack in the judge's careful composure. "I have reviewed the evidence in this case extensively. The security footage is clear and damning. The witness testimony is consistent and credible. The medical evidence documents real, lasting harm to the victim." Marcus's voice grew firmer. "My sister's actions were not a misunderstanding. They were an assault on a child, carried out with arrogance and a belief that family connections would provide immunity from consequences." Karen's face went white. Beside her, Barnes sat very still. "I must also acknowledge something that troubles me deeply," Marcus continued. "During the prosecution of this case, I made inquiries that, while technically within bounds of collegial discussion, were inappropriate given my relationship to the defendant. I spoke to colleagues about sentencing guidelines. I inquired about case protocols. I attempted to understand how this case might be resolved in ways favorable to my sister." The courtroom stirred. Marcus was confessing his own misconduct publicly, creating a record of his interference. "I did not break any explicit rules, but I violated the spirit of judicial ethics. I let family loyalty cloud my judgment, and I attempted to use my position's influence to protect someone who should have faced justice without interference." His voice was strained now, each word clearly painful. "Mr. Brennan, the victim's guardian, documented every one of those contacts. He built a case within the case, ensuring that if justice was subverted, there would be accountability." Owen felt every eye in the courtroom turn toward him. Marcus met his gaze directly. "Mr. Brennan is a former JAG Corps prosecutor who specialized in authority abuse cases. He spent 12 years prosecuting people who thought their rank exempted them from rules. When my sister assaulted his niece, he didn't seek vigilante justice. He used the system exactly as it was designed, documenting evidence, following procedure, building an unbreakable case. And when I attempted to interfere from the shadows, he documented that too." Marcus picked up a document from his bench. "I have here a complaint prepared for the Commission on Judicial Performance, detailing my improper contacts during this case. It has not been filed yet because Mr. Brennan was waiting to see if I would do the right thing today." He set the document down. "I am grateful for that opportunity, not because it allows me to escape consequences. I will be submitting this complaint myself after this hearing, along with my resignation, effective 30 days from today. But because it allows me to sentence my sister with the integrity the law demands, one final time. Karen made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Marcus didn't look at her. The victim in this case is a child who lost her mother and found safety with a guardian who taught her to believe in justice. My sister tried to destroy that belief through violence and intimidation. She failed not because of my intervention, but because of my failure to intervene improperly enough to matter. Marcus straightened, his judge's voice returning in full. Karen Holloway Vance, you are hereby sentenced to 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You will complete anger management counseling, perform 200 hours of community service, and are subject to a permanent restraining order prohibiting contact with the victim or her family. You will pay full restitution for medical expenses and ongoing therapy costs. He banged the gavel once, sharp and final. Court is adjourned. The gavel's echo faded into stunned silence. Then the courtroom erupted, journalists scrambling for their phones, advocates conferring in urgent whispers, courthouse staff exchanging looks of disbelief. Karen sat frozen at the defense table, her face gray as Mitchell Barnes spoke quietly in her ear. She shook her head repeatedly, refusing to accept what had just happened. Marcus stood and walked off the bench without looking back, his shoulders rigid with the weight of what he'd just done. The bailiff moved forward to process Karen's remand into custody. Her expensive suit and perfect hair suddenly looked ridiculous as reality crashed down around her. She was going to jail, convicted and sentenced by her own brother, the very person she'd believed would protect her. Owen guided Mia out through the side door before the reporters could reach them. Rachel Ortiz intercepted them in the hallway, her expression torn between satisfaction and sympathy. That was the most brutal act of judicial integrity I've ever witnessed, she said quietly. He destroyed his career to sentence his sister fairly. He destroyed his career because he tried to corrupt the system first, Owen replied, his voice even. The sentencing was just him choosing the least damaging way out. Still, that took courage. Rachel glanced at Mia. How are you holding up? Mia wiped her eyes, but her voice was steady. I told the truth, and it mattered. That's what Uncle Owen said would happen. Outside, reporters clustered near the courthouse entrance, but David Kessler had arranged for them to exit through the staff parking area. Owen's truck was waiting, anonymous among the other vehicles. They drove in silence for several minutes, Mia staring out the window as the courthouse disappeared behind them. Is it really over? She asked finally. The criminal case is over. Karen will serve her sentence. Owen navigated through afternoon traffic, his hands steady on the wheel. The appeals process might take time, but the evidence was too strong. She won't win. And Judge Holloway? Will he really resign? He has to. He confessed to judicial misconduct in open court. Owen glanced at his niece. He made that choice himself, not because I forced him, but because continuing would have meant living with everyone knowing he'd compromised his integrity. Mia was quiet for a moment. Do you think he's a bad person? Owen considered the question carefully. I think he's a person who loved his sister and made increasingly bad choices trying to protect her. He crossed lines he shouldn't have crossed, used influence he shouldn't have used. But in the end, when it mattered most, he chose justice over family loyalty. That doesn't erase what he did wrong, but it counts for something. They stopped at a red light. Mia turned to look at him. You knew this would happen, didn't you? Not exactly this, but something like it. I knew that if I built the case correctly, if I documented everything, and if I made sure the people doing their jobs had what they needed, the system would work. Owen's voice was quiet. That's what I did in the JAG Corps. I didn't manipulate outcomes. I just made sure truth and evidence couldn't be buried. You're still a prosecutor, Mia said. You just don't wear the uniform anymore. Owen smiled slightly. Maybe. But being your dad matters more than any case I ever won. That evening, Owen's phone rang, an unfamiliar number. He answered cautiously. Mr. Brennan, this is Colonel Patricia Hendricks from the JAG Corps. Her voice was crisp, professional. I've been following your niece's case through legal channels. I wanted to inform you that your former position has an opening. Given your exemplary record and the skill you demonstrated in handling this civilian matter, we'd like to offer you immediate reinstatement at your previous rank with a promotion to senior trial counsel. Owen looked across the living room, where Mia sat doing homework at the kitchen table, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been for months. I appreciate the offer, Colonel, but I have to decline. May I ask why? This is a significant opportunity, Mr. Brennan. Your talents are being underutilized in civilian maintenance work. With respect, Colonel, my talents are being used exactly where they matter most. I'm raising my daughter. That's the most important mission I've ever had. Owen's voice was firm but polite. I spent 12 years prosecuting authority abuse in the military. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure one kid feels safe and knows the world has rules that actually protect people. That's enough. There was a pause. I understand. The offer remains open if circumstances change. And, Mr. Brennan, what you did for your niece, building that case, fighting that fight while working a humble job. That's the kind of integrity we try to teach at JAG. You honored the Corps even after leaving it. After hanging up, Owen joined Mia at the table. She looked up from her math homework. Who was that? My old job offering me a promotion. Her eyes widened. Are you going to take it? No, I already have the job I want. Mia smiled, that genuine smile that had been missing for months. Being my dad? Being your dad. 3 weeks later, Owen was mopping the courthouse basement floor, the same floor he'd mopped for 6 years, wearing the same uniform, doing the same work. But something fundamental had shifted. Attorneys passing through the hallway nodded respectfully now. Judges who'd never noticed him before stopped to thank him for his service. Word had spread about who he really was, what he'd done. David Kessler found him during lunch break, carrying 2 coffees. Thought you might want company. They sat on a bench outside the maintenance office. David handed him one of the cups. Marcus's resignation was finalized yesterday. He's leaving the bench with his pension intact and no formal sanctions, but his reputation is finished. No one will hire him for private practice with that confession on record. He made his choices, Owen said. So did you. You could have exposed him earlier, destroyed him before trial. Instead, you waited, let the system work, and only used your leverage when absolutely necessary. David sipped his coffee. That's the difference between revenge and justice. Owen nodded slowly. Revenge is about making someone suffer. Justice is about making sure the rules matter, that systems work the way they're supposed to. I didn't want to destroy Marcus Holloway. I just wanted Karen to face consequences for what she did to my daughter. Mission accomplished. David stood. You're wasted in maintenance, you know. Courthouse administrator position opens up in 6 months when I retire. You should apply. I'm fine where I am. David smiled. Just think about it. You've already proven you understand how this place works better than anyone else here. That evening, Owen arrived home to find Mia in the kitchen making dinner, her first attempt at cooking since the assault. The simple act of her moving comfortably in public spaces again, reclaiming normalcy, meant more than any verdict. She looked up when he entered. I got an email from the parent advocacy group. They want me to speak at a conference about what happened, about how the system worked. Do you want to? Mia considered. I think so. Maybe it'll help other kids know they can fight back when someone hurts them, that they don't have to be powerless. Owen felt pride swell in his chest. You're incredibly brave. I learned from you. She turned back to the stove. You gave up everything for me, Uncle Owen. Your career, your reputation, everything. And you never complained once. I didn't give up anything that mattered, Owen said quietly. I traded one mission for a better one. They ate dinner together, talking about her upcoming school project and her therapist's suggestion that she was ready to reduce appointments to twice monthly. Small victories, incremental healing, the slow restoration of a life that had been violently disrupted. Later, Owen stood at Mia's bedroom door, watching her sleep peacefully for the first time in months. No nightmares tonight. No fear. Just a teenager resting after a hard day, secure in the knowledge that when the world had tried to hurt her, the people and systems around her had fought back. 6 months passed. Winter gave way to spring, and Mia's healing continued in small, steady increments. She returned to shopping with friends, though she still avoided the Riverside Mall. Her grades remained strong, the nightmares came less frequently, She'd even started talking about college applications, planning for a future that felt possible again. Karen Holloway Vance served her sentence in county jail without incident. Mitchell Barnes filed an appeal, arguing judicial bias given Marcus's relationship to the defendant, but the appellate court rejected it unanimously. Marcus's public confession and strict adherence to sentencing guidelines had created an unimpeachable record. The conviction stood. Owen continued his maintenance work, though the job felt different now. People saw him differently, not as invisible labor, but as someone who'd proven that integrity and skill existed in unexpected places. David Kessler had been serious about the administrator position, mentioning it twice more, but Owen remained content where he was. Then Rachel Ortiz called on a Tuesday afternoon. "You need to see something. Can you meet me at the courthouse cafe in 20 minutes? Owen found her at a corner table, her laptop open. She turned the screen toward him without preamble. It showed a news article from the Sacramento Bee. Former judge's sister granted early release consideration. Overcrowding cited. Owen's jaw tightened. She's served 4 months of an 18-month sentence. County jail overcrowding has been an issue for years. The sheriff's department has authority to grant early release for nonviolent offenders to manage capacity. Rachel's voice was tight with frustration. Karen's attorney filed a petition citing her clean record in custody, completion of anger management classes, and the jail's population crisis. The sheriff's office approved her for release pending a hearing. When's the hearing? Friday, 3 days from now. Judge Holloway isn't involved, obviously, but the judge assigned is Robert Chen. He's known for being lenient on first-time offenders, and he wasn't here during the trial. He might not understand the full context of what Karen did. Owen sat back, thinking. The early release process was legitimate, designed to address a real problem with jail overcrowding, but it also meant that Karen could walk free after serving less than a quarter of her sentence. The system that had delivered justice was now threatening to undermine it through bureaucratic necessity. "Does Mia know?" Rachel asked. "Not yet. I'll tell her tonight." Owen's voice was calm, but his mind was already working through options. What's the standard for denying early release? The judge has to find that releasing the defendant poses a threat to public safety or that the original sentence requirements haven't been met. But with Karen's clean custody record and completion of required programs, that's a hard argument to make. Owen nodded slowly. Then we need to make sure Judge Chen understands what he's actually deciding. Not just whether Karen followed jail rules, but whether the sentence imposed was about punishment or about protecting the victim. That evening, Owen sat with Mia and explained the situation carefully. Her face paled, but she listened without interrupting. "So, she might get out this week?" Mia's voice was small. "There's a hearing Friday. The judge will decide whether early release is appropriate." Owen took her hand. "I want you to understand something. This isn't the system failing. Overcrowding is a real problem that affects hundreds of people, but that doesn't mean we can't fight to make sure your voice is heard. What can we do? We can submit a victim impact statement to the court explaining how early release would affect you. We can show that Karen's sentence wasn't just about punishing her, it was about giving you time to heal without fearing you'd encounter her." Owen's voice was steady. "If you're willing, we can ask to speak at the hearing." Mia was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "I don't want to be scared again. I don't want her walking around free while I'm still having panic attacks about what she did." They worked together that evening, drafting a statement that explained how Mia's healing was ongoing, how the therapy was helping but far from complete, how the knowledge that Karen was in custody had allowed Mia to reclaim her sense of safety. Owen kept the language clear and factual, letting Mia's experience speak for itself without embellishment. Friday morning arrived cold and bright. Owen took the day off work, and he and Mia dressed formally for court. Rachel met them outside Judge Chen's courtroom, carrying a folder of documentation. Jessica Chen, no relation to the judge, submitted a brief opposing early release, Rachel said. She cited the severity of the original offense, the victim's age, and the ongoing psychological impact. It's solid work. The courtroom was less crowded than Karen's sentencing had been, but several reporters were present, along with representatives from the parent advocacy groups that had followed the case. Karen entered wearing civilian clothes provided for the hearing, looking healthier than she had at sentencing. Her time in custody had been manageable, even comfortable by jail standards. Mitchell Barnes stood first, arguing efficiently that his client had met every requirement for early release. She'd completed anger management with exemplary evaluations. She'd caused no disciplinary issues. She posed no threat to public safety. The jail needed bed space for incoming defendants. Release was appropriate and aligned with standard county practices. Jessica Chen countered by reading portions of the trial record, witness testimony describing Karen's aggression, medical evidence of Mia's trauma, the security footage that showed deliberate assault. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, Jessica argued. This was sustained violence against a child, followed by months of legal maneuvering to avoid consequences. 4 months in custody doesn't erase the harm or complete the sentence the jury and judge determined was appropriate. Then it was Mia's turn. She walked to the podium carrying her statement, her hands steadier than they had been at sentencing. Owen watched from the gallery, every protective instinct alert, but trusting his daughter to speak her truth. "Your Honor, my name is Mia Brennan. I'm the person Karen Holloway Vance assaulted." Mia's voice was quiet but clear. "6 months ago, I told Judge Holloway that what she did still affected me every day. That's still true. I still have nightmares. I still panic in stores. I'm in therapy twice a month working through trauma that wouldn't exist if she hadn't decided to hurt me." Mia looked directly at Judge Chen. "My uncle told me the jail is overcrowded, that other people need space, that this isn't personal against me. I understand that, but I need you to understand something too. The 18-month sentence wasn't just punishment, it was time. Time for me to heal, time to feel safe knowing she couldn't come near me, time to rebuild what she destroyed." Her voice strengthened. "If you release her after 4 months, you're telling me that her convenience matters more than my healing. You're saying that following jail rules erases assaulting a child. I'm asking you not to do that. I'm asking you to let the sentence mean something." Mia returned to her seat, and Owen squeezed her shoulder gently. Judge Chen sat quietly for a moment, reviewing his notes, then looked up. "I'll issue my decision by end of business today. This hearing is adjourned." Owen and Mia waited in the courthouse hallway, the afternoon stretching endlessly. Rachel brought them coffee and stayed close, her presence a quiet reassurance. Reporters drifted in and out, checking for updates. Jessica Chen emerged once to tell them the judge was taking the matter seriously, reviewing not just the current petition, but the entire trial record. At 4:30, the bailiff called them back into the courtroom. Judge Chen was already on the bench, a written order in front of him. Karen sat with Mitchell Barnes, her expression carefully neutral, but her hands clenched tight on the defense table. Judge Chen looked at the courtroom, then began. "I've reviewed the petition for early release, the prosecution's opposition, the victim impact statement, and substantial portions of the original trial record. This is not a simple overcrowding case, and I will not treat it as such." He glanced at his written order. Karen Holloway Vance was convicted of multiple counts, including assault and child endangerment. The victim was 16 years old. The assault was captured on security footage and witnessed by multiple people. The psychological harm was documented by medical professionals and remains ongoing. Karen's face began to pale. The defendant has indeed maintained good behavior in custody and completed required programs. Under normal circumstances, these factors would support early release consideration. However, the court must balance institutional needs against the purpose of the original sentence. Judge Chen's voice grew firmer. Judge Holloway, despite extraordinary personal conflict, imposed a carefully considered sentence that served multiple purposes: punishment, deterrence, and victim protection. He explicitly noted the ongoing harm to the victim and the need for accountability. The judge looked directly at Karen. 4 months of good behavior in a controlled environment does not address the trauma you inflicted, nor does it demonstrate genuine rehabilitation. Your attorney argues you pose no threat to public safety, but the victim's statement makes clear that your release at this time would threaten her sense of safety and impede her ongoing healing. Owen felt Mia's hand find his, gripping tight. "Furthermore, I am troubled by the timing of this petition. Less than a third of the sentence served, filed as soon as the minimum eligibility period passed, suggests a continued belief that consequences can be minimized through legal maneuvering rather than genuine acceptance of responsibility." Judge Chen picked up his order. "The petition for early release is denied. The defendant will serve the remainder of her sentence as imposed. This court will not revisit the matter, absent extraordinary circumstances. The gavel struck once, final and absolute. Karen's composure shattered. She turned to Barnes, her voice rising in protest, but the bailiff was already approaching to return her to custody. As she was led away, she looked at Mia for the first time since the hearing began, not with remorse, but with something closer to resentment, as if she still believed herself the victim of an unjust system. Owen guided Mia out of the courtroom before Karen was fully removed. In the hallway, his niece collapsed against him, sobbing with relief. He held her while she shook, whispering that it was over now, that she was safe, that justice had held. Rachel joined them, her expression satisfied. Judge Chen didn't just deny the petition. He shut the door on future attempts. That language about extraordinary circumstances means she'll serve the full sentence unless something truly unusual happens. "Thank you," Owen said, "for everything, for taking this seriously from the beginning." "Thank you for showing me what a properly built case looks like," Rachel replied, "and for reminding me why we do this work." Outside the courthouse, spring sunshine felt warmer than it had in months. Mia lifted her face to it, breathing deeply. "Can we go home now?" "We can go home." They drove in. Comfortable silence, the weight of 6 months lifting gradually. When they reached their apartment, Mia went straight to her room, not to hide, but to call her therapist with the good news. Owen heard her voice through the door, lighter than it had been in half a year. He sat at the kitchen table and opened his laptop. The documentation file he'd maintained so carefully, evidence of Judge Holloway's interference, the timeline of Karen's case, every detail meticulously recorded, no longer needed to be held as leverage. The system had worked, completely and finally. Owen archived the file, backed it up one last time, and closed his laptop. His phone buzzed, a text from David Kessler. "Heard about Judge Chen's ruling. Well done. Maintenance supervisor position is beneath you, but I respect your priorities. The courthouse is lucky to have you in whatever capacity you choose." Owen smiled and typed back, "I'm exactly where I need to be." That evening, Mia cooked dinner again, her third attempt since the sentencing, each one more confident than the last. They ate together, talking about her upcoming speech at the advocacy conference, her college application timeline, her plans to volunteer at a youth crisis center. Small pieces of a future reassembling themselves into something whole. After dinner, Owen stepped outside onto their small apartment balcony. The courthouse was visible in the distance, its windows glowing in the twilight. He'd walked away from a prestigious career to raise one child. He'd traded courtroom victories for maintenance work. He'd let himself become invisible so Mia could have stability. But when someone had tried to hurt his daughter, every skill he'd ever learned had come back, not as weapons, but as tools to make the system work exactly as it was designed. He'd documented evidence, followed procedure, built leverage, and waited for the right moments to use it. He'd proven that justice didn't require uniforms or titles or power. It required precision, patience, and an unwillingness to let influence triumph over truth. The maintenance supervisor uniform hanging in his closet wasn't a step down from being a JAG prosecutor. It was a different kind of service, equally important, equally honorable. Owen had spent 12 years prosecuting authority abuse in the military. Now he'd spend the rest of his life showing one teenager that the world had rules, that systems could work, that people without power could still fight back and win. That was enough. That was everything. He went back inside where Mia was washing dishes, humming softly to herself, a sound he hadn't heard since before the assault. She smiled at him over her shoulder, and in that smile Owen saw everything that mattered, not victories in court or prestigious positions or professional recognition. Just a kid feeling safe again, a daughter knowing her father would always fight for her, a system that had bent under pressure but ultimately held. Justice, in its purest form. Subscribe, and don't miss our next story, where we prove that real power isn't about the position you hold. It's about the principles you refuse to compromise. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next? Owen Brennan returned to work Monday morning, put on his maintenance uniform, and mopped the courthouse floors. Nobody looking at him would guess he'd just dismantled a judge's career and ensured his sister served her full sentence. Nobody would know he'd been a decorated prosecutor who'd given it all up for love. And that was exactly how Owen wanted it. Invisible, humble, and absolutely unshakable when it mattered most.